In 1946, a physician named John Charles Cutler, working for the United States Public Health Service, arrived in Guatemala City with funding, a small team, and a specific objective: infect human beings with syphilis, gonorrhea, and chancroid, then test whether various chemicals could prevent the infections from taking hold. He needed subjects who couldn't refuse. He found them in a national prison, an army barracks, the country's only psychiatric hospital, and a state-run orphanage. Over the next 2 years, Cutler and his team deliberately infected more than 1,300 people. Many of them never received treatment. The results were classified. The report was filed in a university archive and sat there, undisturbed, for 64 years. We've been talking about places and brains that kill you. But the most dangerous thing you can encounter isn't a cave, a bias, or a predator. It's a person with funding and no oversight. Today, we're covering 3 experiments. Not MK Ultra. Everyone knows that one. These are less famous, arguably worse, and they share one thing in common. The people who ran them believed, with absolute sincerity, that they were doing important work. That's the part that should bother you. Back to Guatemala. Cutler's methodology was straightforward and horrifying. The initial plan was to use sex workers to transmit syphilis to prisoners through what the researchers called normal exposure. When that method proved too unreliable, the infection rate was lower than expected. Cutler escalated. He began applying syphilitic material directly to abrasions on the subject's skin. He injected it into their spinal fluid. He smeared gonorrheal pus into their eyes, urethras, and rectums. One psychiatric patient, a woman named only as Berta in the records, was infected with syphilis, then reinfected, then given gonorrhea in both eyes, her urethra, and her rectum. Within days, her eyes were filled with pus, and she was bleeding internally. She died on August 27th. Cutler noted the death in his records. He continued the study. The timing is what makes this permanently unsettling. In December 1946, while Cutler was running these experiments in Guatemala, the Nuremberg trials were underway in Germany. 23 Nazi physicians were standing trial for conducting medical experiments on concentration camp prisoners. The international community was in the process of establishing the Nuremberg Code, which would declare that voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. Cutler was doing the same thing, in the same year, on the same kind of subjects, people who could not refuse. The Nuremberg Code was being written to prevent exactly what he was doing. He was doing it anyway, and he wasn't hiding in a basement. He filed reports. He sent updates to his supervisors. His project was reviewed and approved by a funding committee that included faculty from Johns Hopkins, Harvard, and the University of Pennsylvania. The Surgeon General of the United States signed off on the grant. After the Guatemala study ended, Cutler went on to participate in the Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment, the one where 400 African-American men with syphilis were studied for decades without being told they were sick and without being offered treatment that existed and worked. Cutler retired with honors. He became a professor at the University of Pittsburgh, where he was described as much beloved. He died in 2003. His records were donated to the University Archive. In 2005, a historian named Susan Reverby found them while researching something else. In 2010, President Obama called the president of Guatemala to apologize. 64 years after the fact. Different city, same pattern. Philadelphia, 1951. A dermatologist named Albert Kligman walks into Holmesburg Prison for the first time. He's been invited to treat an outbreak of athlete's foot. Holmesburg houses about 3,000 inmates. Nearly 9 in 10 are black. Kligman looks at the population and sees something specific. He later describes the moment in an interview. His exact words, "All I saw before me were acres of skin. It was like a farmer seeing a fertile field for the first time." That quote is real. It was published in a newspaper. Nobody objected. Kligman began conducting experiments almost immediately. What started as a fungal study expanded into a 23-year research operation backed by 33 sponsors, including Johnson & Johnson, Dow Chemical, and the United States Army. The inmates were exposed to herpes, staphylococcus, radioactive isotopes, skin-blistering chemicals, psychoactive drugs, including compounds related to LSD, and dioxin, the toxic component of Agent Orange. Dow Chemical paid Kligman $10,000 for the dioxin tests alone. Inmates received between $1 and $2 a day for participation. In a prison where the alternative income was 25 cents a day pushing a broom, the experiments were the best job available. The informed consent was a technicality at best. Inmates were told they were helping science. They were not told what they were being exposed to or what the long-term effects might be. One survivor described his skin feeling like leather for months after what he was told was a routine patch test. Another described being given pills containing some type of living organism during a 4-day observation period. A third described radiation burns on his back that no one explained. Decades later, when survivors sought mental health treatment and described what had happened to them, doctors didn't believe them. Here's the part that ties the knot. During those 23 years, Kligman co-invented Retin-A, the acne medication that later became one of the most popular anti-aging treatments in dermatology. He patented it in 1967. It made him and the University of Pennsylvania significant money. The product that pays for clear skin in 2026 was developed on the backs of incarcerated men who were paid $1 a day to be human test subjects for chemicals they couldn't identify. Kligman was never convicted of anything. The lawsuit filed by roughly 300 former inmates was dismissed because the statute of limitations had expired. Kligman died in 2010 at 93. The University of Pennsylvania issued an apology in 2021. The College of Physicians of Philadelphia rescinded his Achievement Award in 2023, 72 years after the experiments started. Third experiment, different population, same logic. The Walter E. Fernald State School in Waltham, Massachusetts, originally called the Massachusetts School for the Feeble-Minded. It housed children with developmental disabilities, alongside children who had simply been abandoned by their families. Many of the residents tested with IQs in the normal range. They were there because nobody wanted them. In the late 1940s, researchers from MIT, funded in part by Quaker Oats and the Atomic Energy Commission, needed subjects for a nutrition study. They wanted to understand how the human body absorbs iron and calcium from cereal. To track absorption, they planned to use radioactive tracers, small amounts of radioactive iron and calcium mixed into food. They needed a controlled population. They chose Fernald. The children were between 10 and 16 years old. The researchers formed something called the Science Club. Members got larger portions of food, trips off the school grounds, Mickey Mouse watches, and tickets to Boston Red Sox games. In exchange, they ate oatmeal laced with radioactive iron tracers and drank milk containing radioactive calcium. Some received injections of radioactive calcium directly. Nobody told the children what radioactive meant. The consent letters sent to parents described the program as a nutritional study. The word __, quote _4 _ did not appear. The dosages were small. Later investigations concluded that the health effects were likely minimal, roughly equivalent to a year's worth of background radiation in some cities. That finding is contested by some, but it's the official position. The point, however, is not the dosage. The point is the selection. In 1994, during a Senate hearing on the experiments, Senator Edward Kennedy asked the question that nobody had asked in 1946. Why didn't the researchers conduct this experiment on MIT students or on children at private schools? Why did they choose the most vulnerable, powerless population available, children in a state institution classified as mentally defective, who had no parents advocating for them and no ability to refuse? The answer, of course, is that they chose them because they could, and because nobody was watching. 3 experiments: Guatemala, Holmesburg, Fernald. 3 different decades, 3 different populations, 3 different institutions. Same structure every time. A respected scientist, institutional funding, vulnerable subjects who couldn't say no, results that advanced careers, and a silence that lasted decades. The pattern is not random. In every case, the researcher occupied the highest rung of institutional credibility. Cutler worked for the U.S. Public Health Service. Kligman was a professor at an Ivy League medical school. The Fernald studies were run by MIT and Harvard. These weren't rogue actors in garages. They were the establishment. They published in journals. They attended conferences. They received awards. And they chose their subjects from populations that existed below the threshold of institutional concern: foreign nationals, prisoners, disabled children, people who didn't have lawyers, didn't have advocates, and wouldn't be believed if they talked. The question everyone asks is quote 5, and the honest answer is the uncomfortable one. They could, because it was normal. Not in the sense that everyone was doing it, though many were, but in the sense that the institutional framework they operated in did not categorize what they were doing as wrong. Cutler filed reports. Kligman published papers. The Fernald researchers presented at conferences. None of them hid. The ethical violation wasn't invisible to them. It was invisible to the system. We saw something similar in the medical cures video. Doctors prescribed mercury and bloodletting not because they were stupid, but because the institutional framework told them it worked. Same mechanism, different field. The researchers at Guatemala and Holmesburg and Fernald didn't consider their subjects fully human. Not in the way they considered themselves human, or their families human. The system sorted people into categories: those who matter and those who can be used. And as long as the category held, the ethics were invisible. Ethics committees, institutional review boards, informed consent protocols, the Belmont Report did not emerge because the scientific community had a moral awakening. They emerged because the experiments were exposed. Tuskegee was revealed in 1972 by a journalist. Guatemala was revealed in 2010 by a historian who found old files. Holmesburg was documented in 1998 by a former prison literacy director who couldn't stop asking questions. Fernald was uncovered in 1993 by a newspaper reporter. In every case, the institutional response was the same. We're sorry, this was wrong. It wouldn't happen today. The reforms were real. The oversight structures that exist now are genuine improvements. But they weren't built from insight. They were built from exposure. Ethics committees exist not because scientists learned to see their subjects as people. They exist because it became too difficult to keep the records sealed. That's the lesson that doesn't make it into the textbook version. The textbook says ___quote _6 __. The more accurate version, ethical standards didn't improve because knowledge increased. They improved because the cost of getting caught increased. The science got better, not because the scientists got kinder, but because the filing cabinets got harder to hide. Next time, something lighter. Mostly, we're going to take every predator on Earth, line them up, and send them at you one by one. Your job is to survive. You will not survive, but it'll be more fun than this was.